And in your experience, will the muscle go first or will the surrounding connective tissue go first? And I'm not talking in an acute rupture. I'm also talking about chronically inflamed, aggravated tissues. Are we talking more of one tissue versus another in your experience?
You know, I don't have the. If somebody say back this up with data, I can't at this point. I can only go with what I've seen as far as injuries are concerned.
Right.
And I extrapolate that back to or bone segments of a joint. I'm going to say it's the connective tissue that goes first.
Well, you and I talked about Tommy John surgery, right, for Strasbourg.
Right. And when you think of connective tissue, even though the connective tissue converges and surrounds the belly of the muscle, let's think, though, of the connective tissue, and let's think of joint segments now, or bone segments of a joint. In this case, we'll talk about the elbow. As you're coming through, and with this degenerated shoulder, man, I can't do it as well anymore. But
looks good, buddy.
Coming through elbow,
yeah.
Get this way with my left, it's easier. You're going to see that the humerus is going to go faster than the radius and ulna.
So there's actually a stretch moment at the elbow joint, is what you're saying.
There's a stretch moment. There's an eccentric load moment of not only the muscle tissue, but a huge eccentric moment of the connective tissue.
Mm-hmm.
That connective tissue better be able to be eccentrically loaded,
yep.
or be to be eccentrically loaded,
yep.
and get put in all three planes of motion.
Yep.
Because as the arm comes back, this, we can call it circumduction, but you're going to see that it isn't just the elbow in this case. What's happening to the forearm, because the wrist is in this position.
Yeah.
The tissues of the forearm, which now go into the wrist, are eccentrically loaded. That's going to give you that final snap at the end and cause more velocity and movement on a fastball.
Yeah, and therein lies the value of Davis's law, which I know you and I have talked about before, is that, if we can put load through connective tissue, and if we can do that in different angles and different loads and different speeds, that actually is very inherently important to the development of the connective tissue. And if we can triangulate that, based on Peter Huing's work, and he's a Dutch researcher, he'll talk about that. Different angles, different speeds with different loads. And the fascial tissue loves that sort of stimulus in order to effectively establish an adaptation that is more beneficial. And so, we look at the opposite shoulder to opposite hip relationship. You describe the moments of the elbow and hand, and then what goes through in my mind is, what is the application of that? What do I do in the gym or in the dryland situation that can augment my chances of being successful at producing a fast pitch, so my velocity's up, and sustain that over a career so that my injury rate is diminished, because that is huge value to me as an athlete.
I mean, there's 6 months that most of the athletes are maintaining.
Yeah.
Also, the course of travel, the course of nutrition, they lose a bit of strength. I know that because I've seen it for the many years that I've worked with athletes of every level, that they've lost strength to a degree during the season. Our goal during the season is to maintain. So I want to take that first month or so, depending on how much time I have with them in the off season, I want to do strength training. I want to get hypertrophy. I want to get more force production. But blended into that program, while we may be doing the traditional lifts, I may incorporate a triplane lunge program.
Yeah.
I may incorporate my flexibility highways in motion program, because I need to get those connective tissues, particularly in the frontal and transverse plane, to be able to withstand those forces.
Mm-hmm.
But when I get them mobile in all three planes of motion, the traditional lift becomes more enhanced. They perform better when they do those traditional lifts. What I look for when they're doing the traditional lifts, I make sure that they have to capture dorsiflexion in the ankle, triplane motion in the hip, and thoracic spine mobility in all three planes of motion. Yeah. Otherwise, I start to see back problems, or the pitchers that have come back that have had shoulder or elbow problems. every single one of them, Michol, has had an issue at one of the big movement rocks.
Yeah.
So I've got to gain that back. Now, when I then get them into more sports-specific sports skill work, I do a little less strength training, traditional strength training, but a lot more of the triplane integrated loading the system. That's where ViPRs really come into play.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Venn diagram where certain parts, or you think of it as the alveoli in lungs, certain parts are going to be larger and other parts are going to be smaller, and then I transition them as they get closer to season.
Yeah.
Part of that too is even when we go through the explosive phase.
Yeah.
Because I need to get the traditional explosive plyometric work.
Yeah.
Use the ViPR as a tool to load the system even more, and I also take them without any tools through triplane loading in plyometric work as we get now more specific to the task at hand to start developing their skill work. So when they hit spring training, they're ready to go. Their timing is there, their mobility is there, their strength is there, their fitness is there.
Yeah. And I think that's what's impressing me about, a lot of S&C coaches that we come in contact with is that, they really have fine-tuned their strategies of getting preparedness in their athletes down to an art. I'm not even going to say a science, it's more of an art. And they recognize the different constituent parts that make up a well-rounded program. And I just think of my experience with USC last week, in that they're very similar to what you talked about. There's different phases in the program where they're going to amplify movement-based load training and then linear-based load training for an increased tissue response in certain ways. But they kind of blend it all together in order to facilitate the right outcome for their athletes at the right time. And, that's impressed me.
And if I'm not mistaken, though, Michol, the USC program, I think they learned it from the Florida Gators program.
We'll see this year, buddy. Hey, Chucky, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. So I just am thrilled that we were able to get on this phone call and have a good back and forth session for the length of time we did. I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, and I know you're sought after. So, for me to hang out with you is always a thrill. And, I think as we explore the notion of what we are and how we adapt, it's fun for us because we can stay curious. So I really do appreciate your time, Chuck. Your insights are always extremely valuable.